Good morning.
Good morning. It is Sunday, October 22nd, 2023, and we're delighted to be here with you this morning. And we're talking about change and how we all love it. We're talking about change, the good, the bad, and the
I
ugly.
usually don't lie this early in the program.
And particularly now when all that any of us hear, when we turn on the radio and the
Keep your arm around this way.
television
There we go.
is the latest in the Middle Eastern war. And I think if you're like me, we all just want it to go away. We just want it to stop, because we can't stand to think of the idea of what happens with war. And yet, I'm really glad I'm not one of their leaders who, when they might say, "Tell us what to do," because when there has been an aggression, it's so hard to know what to do because we don't believe in aggression. So what we do believe in is God. We do believe in good. We believe that God is all good and that life is good. And so I'm going to read an opening affirmative prayer. I know that we can all agree on that. We can all know the truth about that. And this is what Ernest Holmes had to say. And he entitled this prayer, "I have limitless faith. My knowledge that the great I am is ever available gives me an increasing capacity to draw upon it and become inwardly aware of the presence of spirit. There is something at the center of my being that is absolutely certain of itself. It gives me complete assurance that all is well. I am a divine being here and now. I know that this consciousness of reality is the supply of my every need, physical, mental, and spiritual, and I accept that supply in the deepest gratitude. I'm thankful that this is the way life fulfills my needs, through this doorway of my inner self, and I'm thankful that I know how to use this perfect law. I come to this great fountain of supply in the very center of my being to absorb that for which I have need, mentally and physically, and I'm filled with the sense of the reality of that which I desire. I know that good is at the root of everything, regardless of its seeming absence. Since there is but one spirit, and this spirit is in me and in everything, then everywhere I go, I meet this spirit. I meet it in all people, in all places, and in all things. There is a divine essence permeating everything, flowing through everything, becoming all things. I have limitless faith in this unconquerable presence. And so it is.
Beautiful.
I think we could all agree that that we believe that, and we know that to be our truth. And so then, as we contemplate this situation, you know, one of the first things Bob came up with is, tell me that Rumi poem again. And you know, that Rumi poem is, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And of course, that's what we would love to know and have in our life right now, is to be able to go out to a place beyond judgments and without finding who's wrong and who's right and who deserves what, but just to know beyond all judgment, self-judgment, other judgment, there is peace. Let's find that. And so, did you want to say more about that Rumi poem? No,
Actually, and what I like in part about it too is it's, excuse me, goodness. What I like about it also is it speaks to a journey, moving from where you are to a place, another place, a field, moving out into a field, we have to be willing to move from where we are to a place of peace. And when I say move, I mean by that in consciousness and in our thinking. So it's a beautiful idea to be able to pick up where you are and move to a field of openness, of love, and of kindness. And I think, what are you doing?
Just want to make sure that everyone
Okay.
is muted.
Sorry.
Didn't know that would go right in the middle.
Yeah. So, but I want to move away from that for a minute. And the thing that struck me the most, did you want to go back to this or?
Yeah,
Go
because
ahead. Go ahead.
on the rest of the
Yeah.
poem.
Yeah.
So out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Oh, guess what? I don't have the whole poem. I thought I did. Okay. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, and even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense.
That is so
In
beautiful.
other words, we're really all one, we're not other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, but it's hard to find right now when everybody's wanting a solution, everybody's wanting the war to end, and it's just beginning. And this is a spiritual knowing we have to have that can keep us from future conflicts, but it's not very helpful right in the midst of one.
What I'm struck with right now in particular, though, is what Ernest Holmes said, which is where peace has to begin is with us from within, that we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And it sounds, to me, it sounds gimmicky sometimes, like, well, that's nice. It's a great cliche. But in fact, it's true. We have to be what it is we want to see, or we're not going to see it, and we're not going to demonstrate it in our lives. And one of the first questions that I guess I would have for all of us, and I have for myself as well, when I get up in the morning and I go to the mirror, do I say, wow, well done, this is good, you are wonderful? Or do I say, wow, I thought you'd be better than this or more than this, or is that another wrinkle? Or, one of our members said wrinkles don't hurt. it's so, that is so precious. But are we able to find peace within at any particular point? And if we can find that peace and we can stand in that peace, we can spread that peace. If we get up in the morning and we don't like who we are, and we don't like what we're doing, and we don't like our lives, and we turn on the TV, and what it talks about are lots of people who are miserable and in pain, that simply adds to our pain, because without recognizing it, we're already in pain. And so what I would ask us to do is to look at ourselves and say, am I in pain before I look out? Am I in pain from within? And if I could not be in pain from within, could I then be a representation of love and of light and of peace and of joy? And isn't that what I want to see more of? I know when I'm not in a perfect mood, which is rare, but when I'm not in a perfect mood, I tend to notice everything that's wrong rather than everything that's right. It's almost as if misery likes company.
Yeah. Well, this thing about self-judgment, which you talked about when we wake up and look in the mirror, and how much self-judgment do we do throughout the day?
Yeah.
Constantly making ourselves wrong for not being this enough or not doing that enough, or what is your self-talk? We tend to inherit and embody the voices of our parents or caregivers, and in their tone often about, one that I hear is, what's the matter with you, girl? Because we were 3 girls in our family. So if anything, if my father was upset with any of it, it's, what's the matter with you, girl? And so we hear those things. That's the wrong question. I finally figured out years into my life, that's the wrong question. I need to be asking me what's right with me. But as we look at this judgment thing, whether, we tend to think about judging others, but when we look at how we're raised, the first 5 years of our life, constantly, we hear from our parents, don't do that, do this. We learn all the rules of what's okay and what's not okay. And what's not okay is bad, and you're bad if you do what's not okay. Well, then we go out into the world, and how do you not project those values onto everybody else?
Right.
And suddenly, when anybody else is doing those things you were told not to do, they were bad, you are judging them. If they chew their food without closing their mouth, that's bad.
I'm reminded of a long time ago, quite a few years ago, but listening to Jean Houston talk about her childhood. And Jean Houston was raised by parents. Father was a writer, comedy writer, and he wrote for, I think, Jack Benny and
Bob Hope.
or Bob Hope, yeah, for Bob Hope. And so they traveled in a circle of people that were all very successful, all very creative. And what Jean was told was that she could be anything she wanted to be. She was an incredible and extraordinary human being. She was encouraged literally every day of the week. And what you see as an adult, in the Jean Houston, the adult, is a person who is articulate, a world leader, and a spokesperson for leadership.
She
Some of
calls
our
herself a cultural
yeah,
anthropologist.
and a published, multiply published author. I mean, she's just an extraordinary human being. But she has lived within the framework of what she was taught. And I think it's time for us to all go back and say, what was I taught, and is it true? Was I taught that I'm not enough, but I can overcome it, or was I taught that I am enough? And if I was taught that I'm not enough, can I overcome that idea and replace it with I am enough? And wherever there's not enoughness, we tend then to look for that not enoughness in every other thing as well.
Yeah, the problem with judgment when we judge others is that we're also turning that inward.
Yes.
And that doesn't feel good. And sometimes that feeling so bad yourself makes you even want to bring other people down a notch or two when you're thinking about them, because you feel so bad about your own self-talk. So that's fortunately in our wheelhouse of something we can do something about, because every one of those thoughts is like a drop of water that can in time actually change the statue of who you are. That it can actually dissolve stone when there's enough drops of water.
It is amazing to think about.
So we need to realize that when we do that to ourselves, then it's inevitable we'll do it to others as well. So it's actually a concept that we kind of don't know how to do it, to not judge, because of how we were raised, being taught right from wrong. If you know right from wrong, that's inherently you got to choose one. And so that causes judgment to be inherent, and that's what we fall into with this war. Who's right? Who's wrong? Whose fault is it? And that's not the solution. The solution is a different question. What is the solution? That's what I'd like to see being done. What could stop this fomenting of anger and retaliation?
Right. So it's important for us to not only not judge us, but whenever we find ourselves judging other people and judging the conditions that are around us, to be able to say, given what I know and given what my experience has taught me, this is what I think. This is not necessarily the way it is. That is, everything can be seen differently, and it is seen through different eyes differently. I'm always blown away when I go to different networks that I don't normally watch, news networks, and then the ones that I do watch, and the ones, of course, that I watch are the ones that are right, the ones that have it all figured out correctly. But when I watch different networks, what blows me away is how the same information can be seen so differently. And it's seen from a point of view. It's seen from a point of judgment. It's seen with a history of points of view. And so what we don't realize is we bring our history, our culture, our background, and our experience into what we believe to be the truth of the situation, when in fact it isn't the truth of the situation. It's the truth of what we have come to believe. It's the truth of our cultural experience, but it isn't necessarily the only truth. And so, and I've talked about this before, and it was a very important thing I learned in college. One of the first things I learned in college, before I went to college, what I was aware of is that people not only had the truth, they were absolutely certain of it. Whatever they believed, that was the way it was. I would hear this again, and this is the way it is, and there's not even a question. When I got to college, one of the first things that I heard professors say was, this is our current knowledge. This is our thinking so far. This is what we know up until now. And it made them sound as if they didn't know what they wanted, or they didn't know very much. But in fact, they were saying, we don't know enough to be sure of anything except the direction that we're moving. We know that as we head towards a greater understanding, we open the door for even greater understanding. And so what would really be helpful for all of us, I think, I'm sorry for my throat today. It's only like that when I when we turn it on. But what strikes me is that if we could constantly be in that position of knowing that we're listening, and that we're talking, and that we're coming from a position of history and a point of view, and when we know that about ourselves, we don't have to speak with this authority, I'm right, and therefore you have to be wrong. One of the first things I noticed when I married Judith, which kind of struck me, was that I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm not dumb. And I figured out a lot of things and the way to do things. And I would explain to Judith, this is what the way I would do it. And in my own mind, without even realizing it, it was the only way I could imagine doing it. And then she would do.
You're talking about mental health practice.
Or anything,
right?
Anything. And she would do something that I would do completely different and get the same result. I thought, wow, there are so many ways to do a thing. And I think we get locked into thinking that the way we do it is probably the best way or the only way to do it. And in fact, that's our history. I'm reminded of a story many of you, I'm sure, have heard before. I heard it early on in my mental health training. And the story goes that there was a Thanksgiving dinner, 3 generations of the family were all together, and they were grandma or mom was fixing a roast of some kind, and she cut the end of the roast off and threw it away, and put it in the oven and did the roasting. And another member of the family looked at that and said, "That's strange. Why do you do that?" Well, my mom did that. And so her mom was in the room and said, "Well, why would you throw a good part of the roast away before you would cook it?" And she said, "Well, my mom did that." So they went to the grandma and said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "Well, the pan wasn't big enough." And so we have 3 generations of people throwing away good food because nobody thought about why they were doing what they were doing. It was what they were taught. We don't realize so often in how many ways we're bringing our cultural experience, our history, our judgments into a situation and then saying that's the truth. And so I think for all of us, if we could be a little more willing to forgive ourselves for our point of view and be willing to open ourselves up to a broader or larger point of view, a greater point of view, we would probably find more peace. Or at least if we can't do that for ourselves, could we allow other people to share what they believe and know it's what they believe, that it's not necessarily the only truth? We could listen to it as what they believe. And it could be helpful. You were going to say?
Well, I was going to say that part of the problem with this right and wrong and judgment is that we, on Earth, we have this experience of polarity. A polarity is a pole, and with 2 different ends. And so we have on Earth this light and dark and right and wrong and cold and
good and bad,
hot and all of that. And we learn to live with it. But it does cause us some problems. And I wanted to read this quote from Ken Wilber, who wrote a book called No Boundary. And he says, "Have you ever wondered why life comes in opposites? Up versus down, inside versus outside, high versus low, long versus short, big versus small, good versus evil, life versus death, pleasure versus pain, God versus Satan, freedom versus bondage. But nature, it seems, knows nothing of the world of opposites in which people live. Thoreau said, nature never apologizes." And apparently it's because nature doesn't know the opposites of right and wrong, and thus doesn't recognize what humans imagine to be errors. And that is true. We were talking about hurricanes earlier. Nature never apologizes for being a hurricane when it is. but because we live in this land of poles, of polarity, we can't think of just being one thing, of non-judgment, being at peace without saying who's right and who's wrong.
Mhm.
But this is really all we can do. We as metaphysicians, all we can do in this situation is know the truth. And as we know the truth, we know that we're one with God, which is good, and that is the essence of all being, essentially, is goodness and life. So sometimes it seems like it's not enough for us as metaphysicians. Well, like I should be able to solve all the world's problems, but we are really helping solve the problems by staying in a state of peace ourselves, staying out of judgment for either side or even for ourselves. But all we can do is know peace, know truth, know love. And when we do so, we help at least our little corner of the world, and that can spread.
Yeah, one of the dilemmas we have is that we often think that we're seeking truth when actually we're seeking control. And years ago, I attended a workshop conducted by a well-renowned psychiatrist at the time who was doing the seminar, and it was on naming. And he said, we love to name things. And we name things because once we've named them, we can categorize them. We can catalog them. Once we've named them, we have some sense of ownership over it. Oh, I know what that is. And when we've named it, we have a feeling of control over it when we actually don't have any control over it. And so much of what we try to do in figuring out what's right and what's wrong is really an underground attempt to have some control over the truth, to have some control over the way things are. And in our mind, that makes us in charge. And the truth is, we're not in charge, but we're observers. We're participants and we're observers, but we're not in charge. And I think when we recognize that we can name a thing, but we don't own it. You can name your dog, but it doesn't make it your dog. What makes the dog your dog, if there's going to be anybody's dog, is the relationship you have with it. But naming it doesn't solve the problem, and it doesn't make things go away. So I think it's important for us to notice how often we try to figure a thing out, not because we want it figured out, but because we want to have some sort of control over it. And in this world today that we're living in, there is so much going on that we don't understand, or that we only have some information about, that the best we can do is to bless it and bring kindness to it and say more will be revealed. Let me stand by, rather than I've got this all figured out. It's got to be this way or that way. They're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and they're wrong. As opposed to, I don't know. I feel I'm right about this. I wonder if they're right also. I wonder what else. I wonder if there's another way to look at this. So we open ourselves up to being open to more possibilities than the ones we have in mind, and knowing that their true mind is bigger than our small mind, the mind that we sort things through with
and judge with.
and judge with. That's what I meant to say.
And so there is an ancient wisdom that actually comes from Lao Tzu, who is an ancient Chinese wise man. And this is saying, again, this is getting to the power of all I can do is have peace within myself. That's enough. That is a something. This is his writing. If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. If there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. And again, that's by Lao Tzu. And so I think that says it all as far as what we can do and have peace in the midst of chaos.
Absolutely.
And so it is. So let's see, we now will be taken to a page to share. where we invite you to support this ministry, support this teaching. And we have a page on our website. Our website is cslpalmbeaches.org. And when you go there, there's a button at the top that's like here that says ways to donate. When you click on it, it will show you ways that you can donate to the center. And so what I ask us to do now is to say our affirmation of prosperity. As we give, we do receive. So say it with me. My investment today is made with the full realization that God is the source of my supply and returns it to me
enriched
and multiplied. And so it is. And so now we end our recording.
Yeah.